Once upon a time, in the warm heart of an old African kingdom called Erioba, there lived a simple farmer named Olin and his gentle wife, Miri. Their house stood near the golden fields, where the wind carried the smell of yam and corn, and every sunset painted their sky orange and soft. They had one child, a little girl named Adina, whose laughter could make even the tired birds sing again. Their life was peaceful, quiet, and full of love. Olin rose before dawn each day to tend his crops, and Miri sold fruits at the village market, always greeting everyone with a smile. At night, they would sit by the fire, and Olin would hum songs while Adina leaned on her mother's lap, half asleep but happy. But peace in Erioba never lasted long. The kingdom was ruled by a proud and cruel king. His palace stood on the highest hill, wrapped in gold and guarded by men who obeyed his every word. The king cared little for the poor. He loved gold, praise, and power. One morning, the whole village woke to the sound of drums, the kind that meant something bad had happened. The royal guards rode through the dusty road, shouting, "The king's treasure has been stolen. No one leaves the village." People froze in fear. The king's treasure was sacred, a chest of royal gold said to have been given to his ancestors, passed down to generations. The guards went from hut to hut, searching, yelling, tearing through people's belongings. Chickens scattered. Children cried. The villagers stood helpless. When the guards reached Olin's home, they pushed open the door without knocking. They threw down the baskets of cassava, poured out Miri's palm oil, and overturned the cooking pots. Adina, barely 10, hid behind the door, clutching her father's old cloth. "Search everywhere," one of the guards barked. Then, from a broken calabash, a gold coin rolled out and stopped at Olin's foot. For a second, no one spoke. Then one guard shouted, "Here! We found it! Here's the thief!" Olin's eyes widened. "That's not mine," he said, trembling. But his voice was drowned by the guards' laughter. Miri ran to defend him, but they struck her down. They tied Olin's hands and dragged him outside. Adina wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. By sunset, the village square was filled. Everyone gathered under the king's banner. Torches burned in the wind, casting long, trembling shadows. Olin and Miri were forced to kneel before the throne. The king's robe shimmered with leopard skin and jewels. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. He asked no questions. He gave no chance to speak. He raised his hand, and his soldiers obeyed. Miri begged. Olin called out, "Your Majesty, I swear, I am innocent." But the king only said, "If the gold was found in your home, you have been judged." Adina hid behind a tree, shaking, her tears soaking into the dirt. She saw her father look up toward the sky, not in fear, but in peace, and whisper something she couldn't hear. Then he turned his head slightly, as if searching for her in the crowd. Their eyes met. He smiled, the kind of smile that said, "Don't be afraid, my little one." And then, the blade fell. Adina's world stopped. The crowd gasped. Miri screamed until her voice broke. The guards dragged her next, and the flames began to rise. The air filled with smoke and cries, and the king turned away as if nothing had happened. That night, Erioba went silent. Even the stars seemed to dim, as though the sky itself could not bear to watch. Adina ran. She ran barefoot through the dark, her tiny feet cutting on sharp stones, her breath burning in her chest. She ran past the river where her father once fished, past the farm where her mother laughed. The forest swallowed her, and she fell among the leaves, shaking and sobbing. She cried until there were no tears left. The moon looked down on her, small, lost, alone, and wrapped her in silver light. When morning came, she was weak with hunger. She wandered deeper into the forest, following the sound of birds, the rustle of trees, until her legs gave way. She thought she would die there, and maybe she would have, if not for a sound. It was a flute. Soft, calm, distant. An old man appeared through the mist, a traveler with grey hair and kind eyes. He carried a worn-out drum and a small bag slung over his shoulder. He looked at the child lying under the tree, dirt on her face, dried tears on her cheeks. He knelt beside her and asked, "What is your name, little one?" She didn't answer. Her lips trembled. He smiled gently. "You don't have to speak. The wind already told me your story." He took off his shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come," he said softly. "You will sing again one day. Even the wind cannot keep silence forever." And so she followed him. Days turned into weeks. The old man became her teacher. He taught her songs about healing, about memory, about the power hidden in the human voice. She learned to sing not with her lips alone, but with her soul. When she sang, the forest stilled, and even the birds stopped to listen. But behind every note she sang, a shadow grew, a quiet promise she had made that terrible night. She never forgot the king's face. She never forgot her father's smile. Years later, people would tell stories about the woman whose voice could calm storms and move hearts. Years later, in a shining city that never slept, a woman stood before a mirror lined with gold lights. Her reflection stared back at her, beautiful, graceful, calm, but behind her dark eyes lived a storm no one could see. She had money, fame, and a house filled with light. But when the music stopped and the applause faded, silence returned. And in that silence, she always heard one thing, the sound of her father's voice calling her name just before the blade fell. Every night before bed, she looked out from her balcony at the glittering skyline. The air smelled of rain and perfume, and the city buzzed with laughter. But she felt nothing. Her success was her armor built note by note, song by song. But armor can be heavy. Sometimes, when she sang love songs, her voice would break halfway, and people would think it was emotion. They didn't know it was pain. She had everything, but she couldn't rest. She had risen higher than anyone from her village could ever dream, but the higher she climbed, the louder her past whispered. She remembered the old man who saved her, the traveler who taught her to sing. He had passed away long ago, his flute buried beneath an old tree. Before he died, he had told her something she never forgot. "Your voice," he said, "will be your gift and your curse. What you sing from your soul will echo in the souls of others. So be careful what you carry inside." Now, standing in the mirror's glow, she whispered to herself, "I am ready to carry it." That night, as she sat in her private studio, a soft melody played from her old record player, a tune she hadn't heard in years. It was a song about home, about the sound of morning roosters, and the laughter of a mother washing clothes by the river. Her hand trembled as she poured a glass of wine. A small newspaper on her desk caught her eye. On the front page, written in bold letters, were the words, "King Is of Arioba celebrates 50 years on the throne." Her eyes froze. The name Is. The same man who had ordered her parents' deaths. He was still alive. Still ruling. Still worshipped. She stared at the picture of him, old, wrinkled, but smiling proudly on his throne. Around him were young servants, dancers, and guards, all bowing in his honor. Adina's heart slowed. She could almost hear the drums of that night again. The screams. The fire. The sound of steel. She set the newspaper down, but it felt as heavy as a stone. She turned off the music. The silence in the room grew thick. She closed her eyes and saw her father's smile, the one that had told her not to be afraid. She saw her mother's hands reaching out for her, before the flames swallowed them. The memories no longer brought tears. Only calm. The calm that comes before a storm. She walked to the balcony and watched the rain begin to fall on the city lights. Each droplet caught a glimmer, turning the world into 1,000 tiny reflections of fire. "It's time," she whispered. She sold her house quietly, cancelled her shows. Her manager begged her to stay, saying, "The world needs your voice." But Adina only smiled and said softly, "The world took it once. Now, I'm taking it back." She packed her things, a simple suitcase, a few dresses, and a small wooden flute wrapped in cloth. The same flute her old teacher had left her. When the morning sun rose, she boarded a bus heading east to the forgotten roads, to the red earth of her childhood, to the kingdom of Arioba. The journey took days. Through cities, through forests, through silence. The air changed the closer she got, thicker, warmer, filled with the smell of dust and palm wine. When she finally saw the old sign that read "Welcome to Arioba," her breath caught. The place looked smaller now, poorer. The palace flag still flew high in the distance, but the colors were faded. The market was still there, busy, loud, full of life. Women calling prices, children chasing chickens, men arguing over goat meat. Yet everything felt different. The laughter no longer sounded pure. It was the laughter of survival. No one recognized her. Time had made her a stranger. She walked through the streets slowly, her golden earrings catching the light. A few people stared, whispering, "Who is she?" She smiled politely and kept walking until she reached the spot where her parents' hut once stood. There was nothing there now, just weeds, dust, and the faint smell of burnt wood that had never truly gone away. She knelt and touched the ground. It was cool beneath her fingers. And then she smiled, not in sorrow, but in power. That evening, she rented a small, empty shop beside the village market, an old place with broken walls and cracked windows. The owner was happy to sell it cheap, saying no one wanted a shop in that corner because it was too close to the cursed ground. She nodded. "I'll take it." 4 days, she stayed there alone, cleaning, painting, and planning. She watched the villagers pass by, studying them quietly. She learned their names, their stories, their pain. She sang softly at night while she worked, and soon, the neighbors began to listen. One day, a little boy stopped at her door and asked, "Auntie, why do you sing when you're alone?" She smiled and said, "Because every song I sing brings back a piece of my heart." And so began her new life, quiet, unnoticed, but burning with purpose. She knew the king still ruled, though older now, weaker perhaps, but still feared. She knew his son, the prince, was soon to take the throne. And she knew what she had come to do. The same voice they silenced years ago was about to become the sound that would end their reign. She was not just Adina Moyo anymore. She was the song of justice waiting to be sung. And the kingdom of Arioba was about to hear her voice once more. Every morning, she swept the floor, humming quietly to herself. She cleaned, painted, fixed the lights, and bought new chairs. The villagers watched her from a distance, whispering. They were curious, who was this woman who smiled at everyone and sang while she worked? The children were the first to approach. They would gather by her doorway in the evenings, listening to her hum melodies that carried through the market like a gentle wind. Her songs made even the goats stop chewing. When she finally opened her doors, she called the place the Golden Echo. It wasn't a bar like any other. There were no loud fights or drunken laughter. It was a place of warmth and wonder. A place where everyone, even the poorest farmer, could sing. She bought a small microphone, some lanterns, and hung colorful fabrics around the walls. She told stories between songs, funny tales, old songs, and parables that made people laugh and cry. Soon, the villagers began to call her the woman with the golden voice. Every evening, the market would quiet down earlier than usual, because people wanted to gather at the Golden Echo. They would sit on low stools, sip palm wine, and wait for her to sing. Her voice had a power that no one could explain, soft but commanding, sad but peaceful. When she sang, people felt their own pain melt away. Even the grumpy old men who had not smiled in years began to clap their hands and hum along. Mothers rocked their babies to her rhythm. Lovers held hands. For the first time in years, joy returned to Arioba's market. But beneath every song she sang, there was a secret message, words hidden in melody. She sang of kings and greed, of injustice and truth. Few understood, but her songs reached the ears they were meant for. One night, as the moon glowed over the market, an old woman approached her after a performance. She looked at Adina closely and said, "Your voice, it reminds me of someone who once lived here long ago. A little girl who lost her parents when the king was young and cruel." Adina smiled softly. "Maybe I carry her song," she said. The old woman nodded slowly. "Then keep singing, my daughter. Some wounds can only be healed by those who survived them." Adina watched her walk away and whispered, "And some wounds can only be avenged." Weeks passed. The karaoke bar grew popular. Even people from nearby villages began to visit. The place became known as a house of laughter and healing. But Adina had built it for one reason, to be seen. She knew stories traveled faster than birds. She wanted her name, her voice, her mystery to reach the palace walls. And soon, it did. One afternoon, 2 royal guards entered the market. Their uniforms were red and gold, their faces serious. The crowd went silent as they walked toward the golden echo. Adina was wiping her tables when one of them said, "The king has heard of your gift. He wishes to see the woman with the golden voice." Her hands paused mid-motion. Inside, her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She wiped her fingers on her cloth, smiled gently, and said, "Tell His Majesty. I would be honored." The guards bowed and left. The villagers looked at her in awe. "That is a blessing," one woman said. "The king himself wants to hear you sing." Adina only nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "It is indeed a blessing." That night, she closed the doors of her bar and sat in silence. The candles flickered. The air was still. Her reflection in the glass looked different, not like a singer, not like a stranger, but like the little girl who once ran through fire. She placed her hand on her chest and whispered, "Father, Mother, the song is almost over." Outside, the village market slept under the moon. But from somewhere deep inside the golden echo came a sound, faint, haunting, like a lullaby wrapped in sorrow. The kingdom of Arioba prepared for a grand celebration, the 50th anniversary of King E's reign. The palace courtyards were swept clean. Musicians tuned their drums. Servants hung long golden cloths from the marble pillars. Everywhere smelled of roasted meat, burning incense, and pride. The king, now an old man, sat upon his high throne, his once dark hair turned grey, his face marked by the deep lines of time. He had ruled so long that even those who once feared him now called him a god. But his eyes were tired, his smile hollow. The past still lingered behind his crown like a shadow he could not escape. When the royal guards returned from the market that day, they knelt before him. "Your Majesty," they said, "we have found the woman. The singer they call the woman with the golden voice. The people love her. They say her music brings peace to the soul." The king nodded slowly. "Then let her bring peace to mine," he said. The invitation was sent that evening, written in gold ink. Adina received it in her bar. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the royal seal pressed into the paper. The words were polite and regal. "The King of Arioba requests your presence to perform at the royal celebration." She folded the letter gently and placed it on her chest. The moment had come. That night, she did not sleep. She sat by her window, watching the moon drift slowly across the sky. The world outside was quiet. She thought of her parents, their laughter, their faces before the fire, and the life they never got to live. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away. "No more crying," she whispered. "Only singing." Before dawn, she prepared her dress. It was red and gold, glowing like fire under light. The color of love. The color of vengeance. The color of blood. Around her neck, she wore a single pendant, her father's old ring, melted into a small charm she had kept all these years. When morning came, the villagers gathered outside her bar to cheer her. "You will sing for the king," they said. "Make us proud." Adina smiled, her eyes soft and unreadable. "I will sing," she said. "And the whole kingdom will listen." The palace was grander than she remembered. White walls stretched toward the sky. The air shimmered with perfume and heat. She was escorted inside, her footsteps echoing against the marble. The hall was filled with nobles and royals dressed in the brightest colors of the land. Drums rolled as she walked in, her golden gown gliding over the floor. The king sat on his throne, old and proud, leaning on his golden staff. His eyes, clouded by age, followed her. "Welcome, singer," he said, his voice heavy but strong. "We have heard that your songs can touch even the hardest hearts." Adina bowed deeply. "I only sing what the heart remembers, Your Majesty." "Then sing," he said, "and let our hearts remember joy." She stepped to the center of the hall. The torches flickered as she lifted the microphone. The drums slowed, then stopped. A hush fell over the crowd. Her first note was soft, a gentle hum that floated through the air like mist over water. Then her voice rose, smooth and golden, wrapping the hall in beauty. The courtiers smiled. The women swayed. Even the old king's eyes softened. She sang of peace, of love, of new beginnings. Then, slowly, the melody began to change. The rhythm grew heavier, deeper. Her tone darkened. Her voice began to tremble with something ancient, something that did not belong to celebration. The lights in the hall flickered. The guards looked at one another, uncertain. Her words turned to sorrow, to memory. She sang of a child hiding in the dark, of parents crying for mercy, of a king who ordered death beneath the moonlight. The guests shifted uncomfortably, but they could not move. Her song held them. The air became thick, strange, heavy with sleep. One by one, the nobles began to doze off where they sat, their heads falling gently as though rocked by the lullaby. The drummers slumped over their instruments. The servants collapsed quietly. Even the prince, sitting near the throne, fell forward, fast asleep. Only the king remained awake. His hands trembled. His eyes widened. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. Who are you?" he whispered. Adina's voice faded into silence. She lowered the microphone and looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, he saw her face clearly. Her eyes were the same, the eyes of the child who once watched from behind the tree. She took a slow step forward, her dress whispering across the marble. "You do not remember me," she said softly, "but I remember everything you did." He gasped. "No, it cannot be." She smiled, calm, almost kind. "I am the child you made an orphan." The king's breath caught. He reached for his staff, but his strength failed him. "What do you want?" he managed to say. She leaned closer, her voice low and steady. "I want silence. The same silence you gave my parents." The torches flickered. A wind swept through the hall. Her eyes closed. She began to hum again, a tune slow and haunting. The king tried to stand, but his body grew weak. His crown tilted, his staff slipped from his fingers. His heart thudded once, twice, then stopped. When she opened her eyes, he was still. She looked around at the hall full of sleeping people. The silence was deep, pure, peaceful. She walked to the throne, took a folded piece of paper from her pocket, and placed it gently on the king's chest. On it were words written in her careful hand. "Every song has an ending. Yours began the day you killed love." Then she turned and walked away. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the palace roof, the woman with the golden voice was gone. The guards woke hours later to find everyone asleep, the king dead, and a single note lying upon him. No one knew what had happened. Some said the gods had taken him. Others said a spirit had sung him to death. But in the market that morning, the people noticed something else. The Golden Echo, her karaoke bar, was gone too. Its doors open, its lanterns cold. And from far across the hills, faintly carried by the wind, came the sound of a song. A soft, sorrowful voice singing to the dawn. They say if you listen closely, even now, when the moonlight touches the roofs of Arioba, you can still hear her voice, gentle, haunting, and free. The child who once wept beneath the stars had finished her song. And the kingdom, for the first time, truly fell silent. And so, in the quiet heart of Africa, the story of Adina, the woman with the golden voice, lived on like a flame that refused to die. Her song was more than melody, it was memory. It was justice. It was love that could not be silenced. The people of Arioba no longer feared the night. When the moon rose above the hills and the wind brushed through the market, they would pause, close their eyes, and listen. For somewhere in that hush between the stars and the earth, they could still hear her, a gentle voice, soft as forgiveness, strong as truth, singing not of revenge anymore, but of peace. The end. If this story moved you, please support the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing. Your engagement helps more powerful African stories reach the world. Thank you for watching.